When thinking about how to start this presentation, I debated whether I should open with a sobering statistic to grab your attention. Ironically enough, telling you that 4,847 Shia Muslims have been killed in Pakistan from 2001 to 2018 was supposed to be the easy part of this presentation. Many news outlets characterize sectarian conflict in Pakistan this way. CNN headlines read, 20 Shiite pilgrims killed in Pakistan bus attacks, or suicide bomber devastates Shiite enclave. There always seems to be a number to quantify the violence faced by Shias at the hands of militant groups. And unfortunately, coming up with numbers is as easy as counting body bags. Except it's not easy. As a Shia myself, I can tell you that talking about the violence never gets any easier. But today I want to push back against viewing the plight of Shias in Pakistan through the narrow lens of a death toll and focus on the violence as a consequence of the social aspects of the sectarian conflict. Firstly, I disagree with people not viewing Shias as embattled minorities, despite the statistics and headlines I shared at the start of this talk. I also disagree with the notion that sectarian conflict is caused primarily by poor governance and militant organizations. I'm going to try and show that these aren't reasons for the conflict so much as they are symptoms of it. Lastly, I want to make the assertion that the social aspects of sectarianism, which include the likes of professional discrimination and social othering, are the major reasons sectarianism thrives in the country. And this assertion is a less easy one to make, because while not every person has it in them to become militant, every one of us is capable of microaggressions. Coming to terms with that is not convenient or easy, but extremely necessary. Firstly, some definitions and context so we're all on the same page. Shias and Sunnis are two different sects in the religion of Islam, the fastest growing religion in the world today. Shias are the minority sect, with them comprising only 10% of the Muslim population worldwide. Sectarianism is the religious differences between two groups in a religion, in this case, Sunnis and Shias. And the resulting sectarian conflict is a consequence of intolerance towards those differences. Allow me to introduce Pakistan, the setting for our discussion today. This country, wedged between India, with the world's second largest Muslim population, and Iran, with the world's largest Shia Muslim population, is home to the second largest Shia population in the world. That sounds less impressive when you realize that Shias are only 15% of Pakistan's population, the rest of which is mostly Sunni Muslim. The disconnect between the former statistic and the reality on the ground hence in the creation of something called the influential minority myth. This is the perception that Shias are a minority only in name and actually wield significant influence in the country, almost like some secret society. And people can be very dismissive of violence against Shias because of that. Let's look at the comment thread under the article How to Be Shia in Pakistan by Zanira Shah. Shows how quick the public is to dismiss the article as an exaggeration. Almost absurdly, this guy said he loved Shia genocide on a Twitter thread called #Shia genocide. Wow. Now, while this myth and its used to undermine the experiences of Shias is inherently frustrating, it's useful to examine why it exists in the first place to see the true extent of social discrimination in the country. Now, remember when I said I disagreed with the notion that poor governance is the main cause of sectarian conflict? Yeah, it's a bit more complicated than that. The government has a horrible track record in protecting minorities from discrimination. Historically, commissions have been formed who, with input from clerics, flat out recommended that non-Muslims not have the same status as Muslims in the country, which led to the passage of legislation which reduces minorities' legal rights. Given that the rights you get in the state are dependent on your religion, that means the state's view on your religion, namely whether you qualify as Muslim or not, could make a world of difference in how you're treated. And crazily enough, these discriminatory laws towards non-Muslims have been put in place even though the clerics interviewed for the report couldn't even agree on the definition of Muslim, with one of them saying that it would be impossible for him to give a complete list of all the necessary qualifications. To put it bluntly, to be termed a non-Muslim in Pakistan is like forfeiting your human rights, which is why anti-Shia movements that want Shias to be viewed as non-Muslims are so dangerous. All of this contributes to the social othering of these non-Muslims, who somehow no longer count as Pakistani. I use Will Durant's definition of social othering, as used in his article Discourses of Othering, where he roughly defines religious othering as the demonization of groups as inferior on the basis of their religious beliefs. An example of this religious othering in practice is the Ahmadi community in Pakistan, which was declared non-Muslim in the 70s despite self-identifying as Muslim. These state-sanctioned discriminatory practices against Ahmadis caused them to lose their jobs, social standing, and they faced attacks on their places of worship. And it's important to note here that though the government's role in the creation of a hostile atmosphere towards the group shouldn't be downplayed, it was the Pakistani public that chose to engage in these discriminatory practices. An entire nation was inspired to socially discriminate against this one group, and governments can only encourage such practices. It's people who ultimately have to act on them, and they do. Mob violence is a natural consequence of all the other points mentioned on this slide. And that social discrimination leads to that violence being seen as okay in society. The argument made by the influential minority group is that along with the clerics, government, and public opinion, some Shia leaders were involved in the drive to have Ahmadis declared non-Muslim. Ergo, Shias are influential in the country. Yeah, I'm not sure how they got there either. That argument ignores the sobering statistics mentioned earlier and the fact that the same groups that campaigned to other Ahmadis turned their sights on declaring Shias non-Muslim sects. For example, a group called Sipai Sahaba has been trying to get Shias declared non-Muslims since its creation in 1984. That's a 36-year effort to want to deny 15% of the country's population their rights. The question is, why? Well, once again, the answer isn't easy and comes back to the social discrimination endemic in Pakistani society against minorities. Socio-political factors, which include economic rivalry between Sunni and Shia populations, and disagreements on religious issues, can spiral into lethal altercations between the sects, as discussed by Qasim Zaman in his article Sectarianism in Pakistan. Using the district of Jang as an example, he makes a case for how sectarian conflict is driven by social factors and how groups like Sipai Sahaba mobilize disenfranchised Sunni youth against affluent Shia municipal board members in the hopes of purifying Islam. Similarly, Pakistan's blasphemy law is misused to unfairly target minorities wrongly accused of insulting personalities Sunnis hold in high regard. So personal grudges can lead to an incitement of violence against minorities using the law as a pretense. But again, it's important to note that while such laws exist, it's ordinary people like you and I who use them to commit atrocious acts of mob violence. And this happens, and this happens because of Shias being an other group in the country. As many as 35% of the population don't consider to be Muslims, according to a Pew Research Center poll. This is a society which shows the killer of a governor posing the blasphemy law as a saint, while simultaneously participating in extrajudicial killings in the name of religious purity. These social attitudes towards minorities are the real reason the government feels emboldened to pass such laws, or why armed groups like Sipai Sahaba are formed in the first place. And once armed groups are formed, they're given a free rein by poor governance, which has led to a Shia genocide in the country. A simple search on Twitter turns up a number of results. One post, since removed, compared the existence of a Shia genocide in the country to, to the existence of Santa Claus. The influential minority myth is in full swing. This is unbelievably saddening and completely avoidable, but a concerted effort needs to be made in finding out how to remedy the social conditions which cause organizations to form and governments to feel comfortable enough to pass these laws. The influential minority myth has blinded the Pakistani public to the social roots of the sectarian conflict. And in thinking that Shias aren't an embattled minority, violence against them continues unabated. Shifting blame completely onto organizations and the government isn't enough. And Pakistan needs to understand and combat the social factors which lead to violence against Shias and other minorities in the first place. Each failed attempt to own up to the very real problem of social discrimination is another life lost for no reason. We're at 4,847 and counting. Thank you. And here's some source slides. Any questions?